Welcome to the Teach Joyfully podcast, where we talk about all things elementary teaching with some mom stuff thrown in. I'm Lisa Burns, a teacher success coach, veteran elementary teacher, and mom of 5, and I'll be your host. Thanks for joining me. Come back to school time, we're going to find ourselves once again teaching in new ways. In fact, teaching online or in a blended school model will be the new normal for many schools around the country. So, how do you effectively teach, not just maintain in these models? So no, we won't be in crisis schooling anymore, but we will be doing something very different from what our normal has been in the past. So I'm asking you to think of this as your new normal, not this is what I'm teaching and eventually it will go back to normal. If we're always waiting for things to go back to normal, our old normal, then we'll never fully invest in this new normal. And this new normal really is here to stay for quite a while. So we have to invest in order for our students to make the progress that they need and deserve. So a couple of things we probably need to clear up right away is this. When we're teaching online, it is tempting to do a little bit of instruction and give students a lot of assignments to complete on their own. And in a blended school model, it's going to be very tempting to do all of our instruction when we have our students in the classroom with us and then send them with packets of work to do at home. I'm going to strongly urge you to not do that. In fact, I'm going to offer you today a different way to think about online and blended instruction. So let's get started. I'm going to use a typical language arts structure that I would use in a classroom as my example for today. This will give us the basis for talking about how we transform teaching from one model to the next and what that looks like. So I start my language arts block with phonics, spelling, or some sort of vocabulary instruction, depending on the grade level. So say I'm starting with phonics and spelling. I would do typically 10 to 15 minute lesson. We do it all together. In a traditional classroom, I am at the whiteboard and all of my students have individual whiteboards and we're all working together. This is how I typically would do my instruction. In order to transform that and do something similar in an online classroom, I would do an online live lesson with students in phonics or spelling. I would use the whiteboard feature. So if you're using Zoom or Teams or whatever you're using, typically there is a whiteboard feature that you can use in that model. Now, another option is in Google Slides, you can use Pear Deck and you can create a whiteboard scenario with drag and drop features that you can also use. The last option is to use a physical whiteboard or chart paper and do it that way. Your students can see what you're doing, just make sure it's in the frame as you're filming. So in a blended classroom model, it would look like this. You would do your spelling or phonics lesson as you typically would in your regular classroom. Then when your students are on their off day and they're at home, you would have a recording for them that they could listen to and follow along with. This is something that is easy to do, and then you can back it up with other kinds of activities that will support what you've already taught them. As an aside, something that I might use while recording would be to use Google Slides or Microsoft PowerPoint and use Pear Deck with it. Pear Deck provides all kinds of interactive features on slides so that students can actually have some things to do and try, not just follow along on those slides. That creates a different kind of dynamic for the student and more interactivity along with your lesson. It also will track your students' responses individually. So this is a nice feature. After this short lesson, then we move into the reading portion of the language arts model. In the reading portion of the language arts model in a typical classroom, for 1 week of instruction, I typically choose 3 to 5 picture books in order to teach that, and I may add in some nonfiction books or articles as well. So say I've decided I'm teaching point of view. I might choose Voices in the Park, the true story of the 3 little pigs, The Very Smart Pea and the Princess to Be, 7 Blind Mice, Hey Little Ant, or The Day the Crayons Quit. I always start my lesson with a read aloud. So I choose one of those books and read it aloud to students. During the read aloud, I am always teaching. I am teaching about skills that they need. I'm teaching about elements of the book and story. I'm teaching about all kinds of things while I'm actually reading. I teach them before I read, after I read, and during the read aloud. This is not just story time. This is a time to teach. You can do the same thing in an online classroom, reading aloud to your students, moving right from that spelling or phonics lesson right into a read aloud and doing all the same teaching in that read aloud. You can do the same thing in a hybrid or blended school model. While you have your students in the classroom with you, you can just move right into this as you normally would. And then you can also record a lesson for your students for the time when they're at home, doing the exact same things, but it's in a recorded lesson. One of the beauties of having online books, and I'm not always an advocate for them, but this is one of the beauties of electronic books, is that you can screen share the story as you're reading. This is a wonderful feature for online and a blended school recorded session for your students. Now, let me just address something that I know is going to come up, and that is in a hybrid or blended school model, so many teachers are going to feel like their students have gotten real instruction from them in the classroom, so they can do a lot of the extra work at home, and there isn't any reason to do recorded lessons. Well, here's my point about this is you are cutting their lesson instruction time down by 50% if you do that. 50%. That's a lot less instruction that your students will be getting if you choose not to do recorded lessons. So I highly, highly, highly recommend that you do recorded lessons. I know that sounds like a lot of work, but it really can work. And here's how it can work. 1 or 2 days your students are with you in the classroom. Maybe you have half your class, and then your other half of the class, say class B, is at home, and they can be doing a different lesson online in a recorded session. Then they can flip-flop. And so then the first group is getting that recorded session, and the second group is getting the in-classroom live session with you. That means that you're teaching 1 or 2 classes during the week, and students are getting 2 classes recorded during the week. That's 4 days of full instruction. That's a lot better than 2 days of full instruction. Multiply that by the entire school year. Now, in the traditional classroom, from here we go into reading time, time for centers, individual work, word work, all kinds of things. And this is a chance for students to practice, right? Well, moving that into an online classroom, your students can do the same thing. They can have time for reading time, centers, and individual work that you give them or assign them to do at home. The same is true in a blended school model. Your students will get that time physically in the classroom, and they can have the same time assigned to them at home. There's no reason to change that structure. Now, I realize in an online or hybrid or blended school model, it's going to be hard to get your students to log in multiple times during the day. So it is much easier for you to move into writing instruction right after the reading instruction, and then send your students off to go and do the work of reading and writing afterwards. If that's the case for you and for your students, then by all means, go ahead and do that. Is it better to do it the other way and have reading time right after they've had reading instruction? For sure it is. But we do have to make some adjustments. Now, in the traditional classroom, while students are doing their independent reading time and individual work, I would be doing small reading groups. You can still do small reading groups in the online classroom. In the online classroom model, you simply are going to assign students to groups and assign specific times during the week that you're going to meet with them. And this is how it goes. Right about 2 days a week, you're going to meet with each group. Not every day, not all the time, 2 days a week. You can use online text that you can share. Just screen share them and everyone will have the copy. That means that nobody has to show up with anything else. They can simply be there and ready to go. If they have small whiteboards that they can use, or they can use pencil and paper for any work that you want to give them during that time. It works beautifully, it's simple to do, and everyone has equal access. In a blended or hybrid classroom model, you can do all of your actual small group reading time in your physical classroom. If you're meeting with students 2 days a week in their groups, that means those 2 days a week that they're in the classroom physically with you, those are the days you're going to meet with those groups. And then when the other section of your class is in session with you, you'll meet with their groups. Everyone will get the time that they need. You can still use the same physical books that you've always used, and they can take them home and practice and bring them back to the next time. In the traditional classroom, I would move from that independent reading time and small group time into a writing mini lesson. In the writing mini lesson, I'm using the exact same text that I did for the read aloud that day as our model for all of our writing skills. During this time, I am teaching specific skills, writer's craft, and techniques that the author is using that students can try out, and all kinds of other things, including a chance for guided practice. In an online school model, you can do the same thing with your live lesson. It's easy to do. You can screen share a text. You can screen share a text as needed and use your whiteboard feature or just you on camera as direct instruction. It works beautifully. In a hybrid or blended school model, you're going to teach this physically in the classroom as you normally would. And then you can also have recorded lessons just like you would for those reading lessons. You can do them for the writing lesson and have recorded lessons where you're also reinforcing all of those skills. From there, we move into writing time. Students need time to write every single day. I know it's a lot, but this is something that's really important. In the physical classroom, you can easily provide writing time, and your students can be assigned writing time to do at home in an online or blended school model. Here's where an online school model has a little bit of an advantage over a blended model on the at-home portion. In an online school model, you can be live online with your students a little longer in that writing lesson while they get started writing, whether they're generating ideas and choosing a topic of their own or working on an assigned writing that you gave them that somehow pairs with the text that you used. This is an opportunity for them to ask questions and get some help as they get started. And then you can all log off and they can keep on writing. Let's take a minute and talk about spelling tests. In a traditional school model and in a hybrid or blended school model, you can do a spelling test in the classroom. However, in an online school model, you're at a disadvantage here. This is an opportunity for you to be a little bit creative. There's a couple of ways to do this. You can certainly give them a spelling test live in the classroom, giving them words and having them write them down, and they can easily show them to you, or they can take a picture when they're all done and send it to you. Or you can use boom cards and have a recording, and they can simply type the words in and it records their answers. Or you can use Google Forms and have students use a Google form in order to be able to answer as you're giving them the words live online. They can log into Google Forms while they're listening to you, type it in, and it will be self-graded. So let me take a minute and address the recording for the blended school model. In the blended school model, not only are you delivering lessons in your classroom, but you're also delivering some online lessons that are recorded. In order to get all of this done, there's 2 methods to this madness. One of them is to batch the work, and that means that you plan a month in advance and then you have recordings for the entire month. You do all the recording on 1 or 2 days. It makes for a couple of crazy days, but it really does work. The second method is to share the load, to work with other teachers in your school at the same grade level and recruiting other teachers at the same grade level in your district. This is a great way to share the load and cut down work for all of you. Regardless of which school model that you're in, communication is still key. And so having proper communication that's appropriate for the school model is important. Now, while not much changes, we'll still be doing emails and phone calls as needed. One of the things that we need to do in an online school model where we're never physically seeing students is we need to make sure that not only do we have online office hours so that we're available for students to simply check in and say hello, but also ask questions and get the help they need. We also need to be making regular phone calls home to check in on families and students. We can't physically come through a screen and actually help students and get them started and get them in and logged in online. In order to keep students logging in and engaged, regular phone calls are essential. A couple other things for you to consider as you're preparing. Google Forms will become your friend. Boom cards are certainly worth looking into. They're simple to create and they can help you with providing some extra attention for things that your students are struggling with. Pear Deck, it works well with Google Slides and also with Microsoft PowerPoint. Pear Deck has interactivity and it adds a lot to lessons, especially if you're in a full online classroom. Books. Providing plenty of reading material for students is always a challenge, even in a physical classroom. But in an online classroom or a blended model, we need to really work extra hard at this. Some things to consider. Online books are fine. However, they are not best for elementary students to learn to read and to develop their reading. They are a great secondary option, and if it's all you have, it is certainly better than nothing. But physical books are much better for students' brains. So, having library checkout days, whether you're in a full online classroom or not, it can be for your classroom library or for the school library, are things I highly recommend if your school will allow it. Consider calling your local public library and ask if your local public librarian would be like to do an online visit with your class. This can encourage library card sign up for your students and families and another option for them to access books. Certainly online books are an option. Physical printed books, especially for very young children who are learning how to read and need some very basic readers, is a great option, and I'll link some of this in the show notes for you with some links that you can also access some books for these young children. These are ones that you can send to families, they can print them off, and students can color and read, and it's a great option, especially but it works great in a blended school model as well. And in a blended school model, you can certainly print them off and provide them for your students to use at home when they are on their off days. So that's it, my friends. Just a quick recap. Remember that the basic framework stays the same. This is not a throw the whole thing out scenario. It's a pare down scenario and get things down to the basics so that you can really teach. You can always add in extra if you feel like you have the time and energy to be able to do that. But don't start that way. Start down with a paired model and then go up from there. A couple of things to remember is scheduled planning and recording time is going to be essential. You really do need to come up with some sort of a schedule that will work for you. Supplemental work that is just in time and directly fits with the lessons is powerful. Our objectives and teaching points need to be a drumbeat that flows throughout all that we're teaching. This means that all of the extras and supplemental work that you have needs to also flow. Checking calls for full online students are a must in order to keep kids going. We can't sit alone online in office hours and expect them to come to us. Yes, there are students who will, but there are plenty that won't, so you need to do both. Reach out. Live lessons are essential in any school model. They're easy to provide in a blended and traditional school model, but in an online school model and for the off days on your blended school model, live lessons or recorded lessons are essentials. In an online school model, I highly recommend live lessons wherever possible. I realize that may not be possible all day long, so you may have some recordings, but do a nice blend of both if at all possible. As we look at the upcoming year and how different it will be, I realize that teachers are going to need a lot of help. So coming up this next year, we are planning some extra things for teachers to help support you and give you some materials to help in that classroom. I can't wait to tell you about it. It's coming soon. I have links to all the resources and the free chart mentioned in this episode in the show notes on my website at www.hopeineducation.com/podcast. So that's it, my teacher friends. We're out of time and I'm out of breath. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you liked today's episode, I'd love it if you'd go to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen and leave a review. And while you're there, hit the subscribe button so you'll never miss an episode. Also, You can continue the conversation online with me in my Facebook group, the Teach Joyfully podcast community, where elementary teachers can connect, get help, and encouragement for all kinds of education and parenting topics. You can find the show notes and links to all the resources mentioned in today's episode on my website at www.hopeineducation.com/podcast. And remember, a happy teacher is a good teacher. So until next time, teach joyfully and take care of you.